Tourist slaps horse across the face. 3 times guard shouts, "Step back, gets police." Streets lined with old-style lampposts and vibrant shops welcomed travelers from far and wide. The air smelled faintly of baked bread from a nearby bakery, mixed with the earthy scent of cobblestones warmed by the midday sun. Tourists strolled along the pavement, some snapping photos of historic buildings, while others paused to watch the street performers entertaining the crowds with music and juggling tricks. Children laughed as they chased each other around the fountain at the center, the water sparkling like 1,000 tiny diamonds under the clear sky. Among the many attractions in the square, one stood out in particular: the horse-drawn carriages. Polished wooden carriages with brass fittings shone in the sunlight, each one drawn by majestic horses with shiny coats and gentle eyes. Their hooves clicked softly on the cobblestones as they shifted restlessly, waiting for passengers eager to explore the city in style. Carriage drivers, dressed in neat uniforms with caps and gloves, stood nearby, chatting with tourists or polishing the harnesses and reins with meticulous care. The horses seemed calm and patient, accustomed to the constant flow of people, yet there was a quiet strength about them that made passers-by instinctively give them a respectful distance. It was a warm afternoon, and the square was unusually crowded for a weekday. A family of 4 laughed as they climbed into a carriage, the children pointing excitedly at the horses while their parents adjusted their cameras. A couple from another country stopped to admire the horses, stroking the sleek coats gently while listening to the carriage driver explain the history of the tradition. The scene was cheerful, almost idyllic, like a page from a travel magazine. Amid the harmony of tourists and animals, one person stood out for the wrong reasons. A tourist, visibly agitated and impatient, approached a horse that was tied to a post, waiting for its next ride. His face was flushed from the heat, and he muttered under his breath as he reached out. Bystanders watched with curiosity, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. The horse, unaware of the tourist's intentions, flicked its ears and nickered softly, a sound that was usually friendly but now carried a note of unease. Without warning, the tourist raised his hand and struck the horse across the face. The horse startled, jerking its head back and letting out a small whinny. People nearby gasped, some instinctively stepping back in shock. The tourist, instead of stopping, did it again. A second slap echoed against the quiet rhythm of the square. The horse reared slightly, its hooves scuffing the cobblestones. The carriage driver and the nearby security guard immediately noticed the incident, their expressions shifting from casual interest to concern. The crowd around the horse began to grow. Some people murmured in disapproval, others reached for their phones to record the unexpected event. A few tourists moved closer, hoping to intervene or at least witness what was happening. The horse's eyes were wide, reflecting both confusion and fear. Even though the animal had spent years working in busy public spaces, it had never encountered such behavior. Its breathing quickened, and it shifted nervously from one hoof to another, seeking stability and reassurance. Nearby, a security guard wearing a bright vest and a small badge noticed the commotion. He was responsible for maintaining order in the square, ensuring the safety of both the animals and the visitors. Seeing the tourist strike the horse, he immediately moved closer, his steps firm but calm. He shouted, "Sir, step back, you can't do that." His voice carried across the square, sharp enough to grab attention but not loud enough to startle the horse further. The tourist, however, seemed oblivious or unwilling to listen. He muttered angrily, waving his hand dismissively at the guard. His behavior drew more attention from bystanders, some of whom started to form a small circle around the scene. People whispered to each other, sharing their surprise and concern. The energy of the square, which had been light and joyful moments ago, became tense and uneasy. The carriage driver quickly stepped forward as well. He was a tall man with calloused hands, evidence of years spent guiding horses through crowded streets. He placed one hand gently on the horse's neck, speaking softly in a low, calming tone. "Easy boy," he murmured, trying to reassure the animal while keeping an eye on the tourist. Despite his years of experience, he felt a surge of worry. Horses were gentle but strong creatures. They could react unpredictably when threatened or hurt. As the situation escalated, more tourists stopped to watch, some recording the incident on their phones. A woman holding a child whispered to her friend, "I can't believe someone would hit such a beautiful animal." A man nearby shook his head, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. It was a scene that no one expected in the middle of a cheerful city square. The security guard stayed calm, keeping a steady distance between the tourist and the horse. He raised his hand slightly, signaling for others to stay back. His training kicked in, reminding him that the priority was the safety of the horse, the tourist, and the onlookers. "Sir, please cooperate," he said again, his voice firm. "We're going to get the authorities if you don't step back." The horse, sensing the guard's protective stance, began to relax slightly, though its ears flicked nervously. It leaned into the gentle touch of the carriage driver, finding comfort in a familiar presence amid the confusion. Its breathing, while still uneven, began to slow as the immediate threat moved away. The horse's eyes, though wide and cautious, reflected the bond it had with its handler, a silent understanding that it was not alone. Meanwhile, the tourist hesitated, realizing that his actions had drawn serious attention. He glanced around at the growing crowd, noticing the mixture of disapproval and concern on the faces of strangers. The energy of the square, which moments ago had been light and playful, now weighed heavily on him. He seemed unsure whether to continue his behavior or step back, caught between frustration and the awareness that others were watching closely. As the crowd held its breath, the security guard reached for his radio, signaling for backup from local authorities. It was standard procedure in such situations, ensuring that trained personnel could intervene if necessary. The presence of official authority often had a calming effect on tense situations, and the guard hoped that the arrival of police would prevent further harm to both the horse and the tourist. Through all of this, life in the square continued around them. Street performers paused briefly, sensing the change in atmosphere. Vendors stopped calling out to potential customers, their attention drawn to the unfolding drama. Children who had been playing near the fountain stared in wide-eyed wonder, unsure if they were witnessing something exciting or frightening. The square, usually a place of casual joy, had become a stage for a real-life lesson in respect and responsibility. As the first signs of authority approached, the tourist finally took a cautious step back. The crowd murmured approvingly, relieved that the situation seemed to be under control for the moment. The horse, reassured by the proximity of its handler and the protective stance of the guard, began to lower its head slightly, though it remained alert. Its muscles, once tense, started to relax gradually, and it let out a soft nicker that seemed to signal a return to calm. The city square slowly returned to its usual rhythm, though a sense of tension lingered in the air. Passers-by whispered to each other, sharing their opinions about what had happened. Some expressed outrage at the tourist's behavior, while others praised the quick response of the guard and the carriage driver. The incident, though brief, had left a lasting impression on everyone present, a reminder that respect, kindness, and awareness were essential when interacting with animals, especially in public spaces. The tension in the square did not immediately fade, even though the tourist had stepped back. The crowd, which had gathered in a loose semicircle around the horse and the tourist, was still buzzing with whispers and murmurs. People were exchanging opinions, some shaking their heads in disbelief, while others tried to understand why anyone would act in such a way. The atmosphere was a mix of curiosity, concern, and a quiet sense of relief that the horse was no longer being struck. The horse itself remained alert, its dark eyes scanning the crowd, but it seemed reassured by the calm presence of the carriage driver and the security guard. The handler's gentle voice continued to soothe the animal, and his hands moved slowly over the horse's neck and mane, showing familiarity and care. The horse let out a soft whinny, which seemed to signal that it was beginning to feel safe again. Yet there was still tension in its muscles, a reminder of the brief but frightening encounter. The tourist, now standing a few steps away, looked around at the growing number of people recording the incident on their phones. Their faces were filled with judgment, curiosity, and a mixture of shock and anger. Some were whispering to each other, sharing comments about responsibility, civility, and respect for animals. The tourist's face was slightly red, partly from embarrassment, partly from frustration. He realized that his actions were being witnessed by dozens of strangers, and that realization seemed to weigh heavily on him. Meanwhile, the security guard maintained his position between the tourist and the horse. He kept his voice calm but firm, speaking clearly to both the crowd and the tourist. "Please remain calm and step back. We are going to handle this properly." His eyes were alert, scanning the crowd for anyone who might approach too closely or make the situation worse. He was trained for moments like this, situations where human behavior threatened the safety of animals or even other people nearby. The carriage driver, standing next to the horse, continued to calm the animal with gentle words and soft gestures. "You're safe now," he murmured, speaking slowly and rhythmically. His familiarity with the horse was obvious. He knew how to read its reactions and what it needed to feel secure again. He checked the harnesses and reins, making sure that nothing had been damaged or loosened during the sudden movement caused by the tourist. The horse's ears flicked attentively, responding to his voice, and it began to shift its weight more comfortably, though it still remained slightly on edge. Passers-by, meanwhile, were increasingly curious about what might happen next. Some had never seen a horse up close, and the incident had caught their attention. Children stared wide-eyed, unsure whether to be frightened or fascinated. A few tourists whispered to each other, discussing the strange and upsetting behavior they had just witnessed. Others took photos of the scene, not to mock, but as a way of capturing a moment that had suddenly turned serious in an otherwise ordinary city square. The tourist finally spoke, his voice louder than before, carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "It's just a horse. Why is everyone making such a big deal?" His tone was defensive, and he gestured vaguely toward the horse as if to dismiss the importance of what had happened. His words drew more attention, and some of the bystanders shook their heads, silently criticizing his lack of awareness and empathy. The security guard did not respond aggressively but stayed calm. "Sir, it's not just about the horse," he said clearly. "It's about safety, respect, and the law. You cannot harm animals in public. We are calling the authorities to handle this properly." His tone was firm, leaving no room for argument, yet it was measured enough to avoid provoking further aggression from the tourist. At that moment, a few more officers arrived on foot from nearby streets. They wore light uniforms and carried small radios, immediately taking in the scene. Their presence added a sense of official authority, and the crowd instinctively gave them space. The officers quickly assessed the situation, noting the frightened horse, the tense tourist, and the small crowd that had formed around them. They approached carefully, speaking calmly to ensure that the situation remained under control. The tourist looked at the approaching officers with a mixture of surprise and concern. He realized that this was no longer just a minor incident. Law enforcement was now involved. A sense of tension replaced his previous frustration. He shifted from one foot to the other, glancing around at the witnesses and noticing the serious expressions on the faces of the security guard and the carriage driver. Slowly, he began to understand the gravity of his actions. The officers began speaking to the tourist, asking him to explain what had happened. Their voices were calm and professional, designed to encourage cooperation rather than provoke hostility. The tourist fumbled for words, stammering as he tried to justify his actions. I don't know, I got frustrated," he admitted finally. The admission was short and simple, but it revealed a recognition, however faint, that he had acted wrongly. Meanwhile, the crowd remained engaged, watching closely but keeping a respectful distance. Some people whispered encouragement to the officers, thanking them silently for intervening. Others shook their heads, still unable to comprehend why someone would strike an animal. The scene had become a lesson in observation for many of the onlookers, who were now more aware of the responsibilities involved in interacting with animals and respecting public spaces. The horse, though calmer than before, was still under close watch. Its handler continued to speak softly and moved his hand slowly over the animal's neck and shoulders. The horse's muscles relaxed gradually, responding to the gentle touch and familiar voice. Occasionally, it flicked its ears toward the tourist, but it did not make any sudden movements. Its body language reflected both wariness and relief, a clear indicator that it was beginning to trust the situation once more. The security guard maintained his protective stance, ensuring that the tourist could not approach the horse again. He signaled to one of the officers, explaining the sequence of events: the tourist's aggressive behavior, the horse's reaction, and the intervention by the guard. The officer nodded, taking notes and preparing to record the incident officially. The crowd, sensing that the matter was being handled, began to relax slightly, though many remained attentive, curious to see what the next steps would be. Meanwhile, the tourist seemed to be reflecting on his actions. His posture shifted from defensive to uncertain, and his voice quieted when he realized that the consequences were likely more serious than he had anticipated. He looked at the horse, noticing its gentle eyes and calm demeanor, and seemed to feel a small measure of remorse. Though it was unclear whether he fully understood the impact of his actions, the presence of the officers and the attentive crowd encouraged him to remain compliant and patient. As the officers spoke with witnesses, collecting statements and reviewing what had happened, the atmosphere in the square gradually began to return to a sense of order. Vendors resumed their activities, street performers continued their acts, and children cautiously returned to their play near the fountain. However, the energy of the square had changed subtly. People were now more aware of the responsibilities of interacting with animals and the importance of public safety. The carriage driver continued to care for the horse, checking the harnesses and reins once more and offering words of reassurance. "Good boy," he whispered, patting the horse gently. The animal responded with a soft nicker, signaling that it was beginning to feel fully comfortable again. The driver's careful attention highlighted the deep bond between humans and animals, showing the importance of trust, patience, and respect. Through all of this, the crowd observed quietly. Some people discussed what they had learned from the incident, emphasizing kindness, awareness, and empathy. Others reflected on the importance of rules and laws designed to protect both people and animals. The square, which had been the site of tension and concern, slowly transformed into a space of reflection and understanding, leaving a lasting impression on those who had witnessed the events firsthand. By the time the officers finished speaking with the tourist and the witnesses, the square had regained a sense of calm. The horse stood patiently, now relaxed and attentive to its handler. The tourist, though still embarrassed and slightly frustrated, was beginning to realize the consequences of his behavior. The security guard remained vigilant, ensuring that the situation was fully resolved before allowing the crowd to disperse. In the end, the incident became more than just a moment of tension in a busy city square. It became a lesson in awareness, empathy, and respect. Tourists and locals alike observed the importance of treating animals with care and the role of authority in maintaining public safety. The horse, calm and well cared for, continued its day, unaware that it had been at the center of a dramatic event that would linger in the memories of those who had witnessed it. The square had slowly returned to its usual rhythm, yet the tension from the earlier incident lingered. Like a quiet echo, the crowd had not completely dispersed. Some people stayed nearby, curious to see how the situation would unfold further. Conversations were hushed but filled with speculation. "Do you think he will be arrested?" one person whispered. "I hope the horse is okay," another replied. Their voices carried a mixture of worry and fascination, reflecting the shared concern of strangers who had witnessed a moment of conflict in an otherwise ordinary day. The tourist stood still, shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly unsure of how to react. He looked around at the onlookers, their expressions ranging from judgment to mild curiosity. Some were quietly recording the scene on their phones, others simply observing, waiting for the authorities to take the next step. His face flushed with embarrassment, and for the first time, a hint of regret appeared in his eyes. He seemed to understand, at least partially, that his actions had caused fear and alarm, not only to the horse but also to everyone around him. The horse remained calm, though still watchful. Its ears flicked toward the approaching police officers, and its large, dark eyes reflected both caution and trust. It had been moments of fear and confusion, yet the careful, soothing presence of the carriage driver had helped it regain some composure. The handler moved gently, patting the horse and speaking in low, rhythmic tones, reinforcing the sense of safety. "You're doing fine," he murmured. "Just stay calm." His familiarity and care were evident in every gesture, and the horse responded, shifting its weight comfortably and relaxing its tense muscles. The security guard stayed alert, standing between the tourist and the horse. His posture was firm but non-threatening, signaling that he was ready to act if necessary but preferred a peaceful resolution. He knew that maintaining calm in moments like these was crucial. A sudden movement or sharp word could trigger panic, and a frightened horse could unintentionally injure someone. The guard's eyes scanned the crowd continuously, making sure no one approached too closely, while also keeping the tourist within clear view. As the first police officers approached, the crowd instinctively gave them space. The officers were dressed in light uniforms, with radios clipped to their shoulders. Their expressions were professional, calm, and authoritative. One officer stepped forward, speaking clearly and politely to the tourist. "Sir, we need to talk to you about what just happened. Please remain calm and follow our instructions." His tone was firm but not aggressive, projecting control over the situation without escalating tension. The tourist hesitated, glancing between the horse and the officers. He seemed uncertain, caught between his frustration and the growing realization of the seriousness of the situation. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet and defensive. "It's just a horse. I didn't mean any harm," he said, his words barely carrying over the gentle murmur of the crowd. There was a slight quiver in his tone, betraying the embarrassment he felt in front of so many strangers. One of the officers gestured toward the tourist, asking him to step aside for a few moments while they gathered statements and reviewed the situation. The tourist complied slowly, his hands partially raised in a gesture of surrender. Nearby, the security guard moved slightly to allow the officers to step in, but stayed close enough to intervene if necessary. The carriage driver continued to calm the horse, ensuring that the animal remained steady and safe while the human drama played out around it. The crowd, though quieter than before, remained attentive. People whispered among themselves, discussing what they had witnessed. Some expressed shock at the tourist's actions, while others focused on the quick response of the guard and the driver. Children, still curious, watched the scene with wide eyes, asking their parents questions about why someone would hit a horse and what would happen next. Parents answered patiently, explaining that animals, like people, deserve respect and care, and that there are rules to ensure their safety. The officers began to ask questions, speaking gently but with authority. "Can you tell us what happened?" one asked the tourist. The tourist shifted uneasily and muttered, I don't know, I guess I got annoyed. I didn't think it would, you know." His voice trailed off, leaving the statement incomplete. It was clear that he was struggling to articulate the reasons for his behavior, and that he was beginning to understand that his actions were unacceptable in public. Meanwhile, the horse remained under careful observation. Its breathing had returned to a normal rhythm, and it stood still, responding to the soft voice of its handler. Occasionally, it flicked its ears toward the tourist, as if sensing the lingering tension but ready to trust the calm environment created by the driver and the officers. The bond between the horse and the driver was evident to anyone observing. The animal's trust in its handler had helped prevent further escalation. The security guard spoke quietly to the officers, explaining the sequence of events in detail. The tourist approached the horse and struck it 3 times across the face, he said. I immediately instructed him to step back, and then I called for police assistance. The horse was frightened but has calmed down under the care of the handler. The officer nodded, taking notes and signaling that the situation was being officially recorded. As the discussion continued, the tourist began to show signs of remorse. He looked at the horse, noticing its large, gentle eyes and the calm demeanor it had regained under the handler's care. For the first time, he seemed to feel the weight of his actions, recognizing that his frustration had caused fear and stress for an innocent animal. His posture softened slightly, and he lowered his gaze, avoiding direct eye contact with the onlookers who had been recording the incident. The officers spoke with the crowd briefly, asking witnesses to share what they had seen. People stepped forward, recounting the events calmly and clearly. One witness explained, I saw him raise his hand and hit the horse. The animal looked scared, and the security guard immediately intervened. Another added, the driver quickly calmed the horse, and the guard called for the police. It all happened very quickly. Their statements helped the authorities piece together a full picture of what had transpired, ensuring that the matter would be handled properly. Throughout the process, the square maintained a sense of cautious order. Street performers paused occasionally, observing the situation but continuing their acts to avoid disturbing the crowd. Vendors resumed selling their goods, though many kept a watchful eye on the developing scene. The incident had created a ripple of awareness, reminding everyone present about the importance of kindness, patience, and public responsibility. The tourist was eventually asked to remain in one spot while the officers completed their formalities. He stood silently, hands folded, glancing occasionally at the horse. It was clear that the presence of authority and the attentive care of the handler had begun to influence him. The crowd, sensing that the matter was under control, started to disperse slowly, though many lingered a little longer, reflecting on what they had witnessed. The horse, now fully calm, stood quietly next to its handler. Its coat shone in the sunlight, and its ears flicked occasionally at the soft murmurs of the remaining crowd. The carriage driver patted the horse gently, whispering reassuring words. You're safe now. Nothing can hurt you while I'm here. The horse responded with a soft nicker, signaling trust and recognition of the care it was receiving. The officers continued their work, asking a few final questions of the tourist and reviewing the statements from witnesses. Their professionalism helped maintain a calm environment, preventing any further escalation. The tourist, though still slightly tense, complied with every instruction, showing a willingness to cooperate. It was clear that the experience had left an impression on him, highlighting the importance of empathy, patience, and respect for all living beings. As the sun began to move lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the square, the energy of the scene gradually shifted from tension to reflection. Passers-by who had paused to watch began to move on, some discussing the lesson they had learned. Children returned to play near the fountain, and street performers resumed their routines with renewed cheer. The square, once again filled with light chatter and laughter, carried with it the subtle reminder of the day's unexpected event, a moment that had left an impression on everyone who had witnessed it. Through it all, the horse remained calm and dignified, a living testament to the resilience of animals and the effectiveness of careful, patient human intervention. The tourist, meanwhile, stood quietly, his thoughts likely focused on the consequences of his actions and the lessons learned from a simple act of impatience. The square had returned to normal, yet the experience lingered, teaching everyone present about the importance of kindness, respect, and responsibility in shared public spaces. By the end of the afternoon, the situation had been resolved without injury or serious harm. The horse continued its work, calm and steady, while the tourist remained under the watch of the authorities. The crowd dispersed gradually, leaving behind the quiet echoes of a lesson learned the hard way, that empathy and respect are essential, not just for animals but for the harmony of the entire community. The atmosphere in the square had shifted once again, but this time it was not filled with tension or fear. Instead, there was a sense of quiet anticipation. People who had stayed after the earlier incident were curious to see what the police officers would do next. Some whispered to each other, speculating about the consequences the tourist might face. Others reflected on the importance of treating animals with respect, realizing that even a moment of thoughtless behavior could create fear and disturbance in a public place. The tourist, who had been standing quietly under the watchful eyes of the officers, now looked around nervously. His earlier frustration had faded, replaced by a growing awareness of the seriousness of his actions. He glanced at the horse, noticing how calm and trusting it had become under the careful guidance of its handler. The contrast between the horse's gentle demeanor and his own impulsive behavior seemed to weigh on him. For the first time, he appeared to understand that his actions had consequences far beyond what he had imagined. The officers moved with professionalism and care. One of them approached the tourist and spoke in a calm but firm voice. "Sir, we need to take a statement about what happened. Please cooperate fully so that we can resolve this matter properly." The tourist nodded slowly, realizing that resistance or argument would not help the situation. He followed the officer to a quieter part of the square, away from the crowd, and began to explain what had happened. His voice was low, hesitant, and somewhat ashamed. "I didn't mean to hurt the horse," he admitted. "I was frustrated and I just reacted too quickly." Meanwhile, the carriage driver continued to care for the horse, speaking softly to reassure it. "You're okay," he murmured, stroking the horse's neck gently. The animal responded with a soft nicker, leaning slightly into the touch. It was clear that the horse had begun to trust the calm environment created by its handler and the presence of authority. The careful attention of the driver reminded the onlookers of the deep bond between humans and animals, and how understanding and patience could restore peace after a frightening moment. The security guard stayed close by, observing both the tourist and the horse. His posture remained firm but non-threatening, signaling that he was ready to intervene if needed while maintaining a safe distance. He had seen many incidents in his career, but each one reminded him of the delicate balance required when humans and animals interact in public spaces. The guard's calm presence reassured the crowd that the situation was under control and that no further harm would come to the horse. As the tourist continued to explain his actions to the officers, the crowd around them remained attentive but quiet. People whispered among themselves, discussing the importance of empathy and awareness. A mother gently reminded her child, who had been watching closely, that animals have feelings just like people, and that it is important to treat them kindly. Nearby, a group of tourists discussed the incident in hushed tones, agreeing that it was a valuable lesson for anyone visiting public spaces where animals are present. The officers carefully documented the events, taking notes and recording statements from both the tourist and witnesses. They asked questions about what had led to the tourist's actions, how the horse had reacted, and the sequence of events that followed. The tourist, now fully realizing the seriousness of the situation, answered honestly, explaining that he had acted impulsively out of frustration and did not consider the consequences. His admission helped the officers understand the situation and plan the next steps. Meanwhile, the horse stood quietly, its muscles relaxed but alert. Its handler continued to speak soothingly, moving slowly and deliberately to maintain a calm presence. The horse flicked its ears occasionally toward the tourist, as if observing the human's reaction, but it remained calm and attentive to the driver's voice. The careful attention of the handler highlighted the importance of patience, understanding, and reassurance when dealing with animals that have been startled or frightened. The crowd began to disperse slowly as the officers managed the situation. Many people took a moment to reflect on what they had witnessed, realizing that even a brief incident could have a lasting impact on both humans and animals. Some discussed the importance of laws and rules that protect animals in public spaces, while others focused on the lesson of empathy and patience. Children who had been watching closely returned to play nearby, carrying with them the subtle but important lesson that kindness and respect matter in every interaction. As the police continued their work, the tourist seemed to grow quieter and more introspective. He watched the horse for a moment, noticing the gentle eyes and calm movements, and seemed to feel genuine remorse for his earlier actions. The officers guided him through the next steps, explaining that while no serious harm had come to the horse, public safety and animal welfare laws exist to prevent such incidents. They emphasized that understanding and respect are essential when interacting with animals, particularly in busy public spaces. The security guard spoke briefly to the officers, summarizing his role in calming the situation and ensuring the horse's safety. "I immediately intervened to prevent further harm," he explained. "The tourist was asked to step back, and I maintained a safe distance while calling for your assistance." The officers nodded, appreciating the guard's professionalism and quick thinking. It was clear that the combination of calm authority and careful human intervention had prevented a potentially more serious incident. Nearby, witnesses shared their thoughts with each other, reflecting on the events they had seen. "It's amazing how quickly things can go wrong when someone loses patience," one person said. "But it's also amazing how quickly things can calm down when people act responsibly." Another added, "I've learned to always be careful around animals. They may not speak, but they can feel fear and pain just like we do." The conversation reflected a collective understanding of the importance of empathy and public responsibility. The horse, fully calm now, moved slightly closer to its handler, leaning into the reassuring touch. Its gentle nicker seemed to signal that it was ready to resume its work, though it remained alert to the surroundings. The carriage driver smiled quietly, proud of how the horse had responded to his careful attention. He knew that moments like these were a reminder of the trust animals place in humans and the responsibility that comes with that trust. The tourist remained under the watch of the officers, reflecting quietly on the events that had unfolded. His initial frustration had been replaced by understanding and a growing awareness of the responsibility involved in interacting with animals. He realized that his impulsive actions had caused fear, disrupted the peace of the square, and drawn public attention. The experience seemed to be leaving a lasting impression, teaching him that empathy and patience are essential in every encounter with living beings. As the afternoon sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, the square gradually returned to its familiar rhythm. Street performers resumed their acts, children laughed as they played, and vendors continued to sell their goods. Yet a quiet sense of reflection lingered among those who had witnessed the incident. The day had turned into a subtle lesson for everyone present, emphasizing the importance of responsibility, awareness, and respect for both animals and people in public spaces. The officers eventually concluded their formalities, explaining to the tourist that while no serious harm had occurred, his actions had violated rules designed to protect animals and maintain public safety. They emphasized that future incidents would be treated with the seriousness they deserved. The tourist nodded, showing understanding and compliance. His expression reflected a combination of relief that the situation had been managed peacefully and recognition of the lesson he had learned. Meanwhile, the horse continued its work quietly and calmly, moving with grace and dignity. The carriage driver maintained a steady presence, ensuring that the animal remained comfortable and secure. The security guard, satisfied that the immediate danger had passed, continued to observe the square, ready to assist if needed. The crowd, now mostly dispersed, carried with them the experience of witnessing a situation handled responsibly and with care. By the time the sun dipped closer to the horizon, the square had regained a sense of calm and normalcy. The horse and carriage remained a central feature, drawing tourists who marveled at the animal's strength and beauty. The tourist, now quiet and reflective, lingered for a moment, perhaps considering the lesson learned from an impulsive mistake. The square, once again filled with laughter, music, and the gentle sounds of daily life, bore witness to a story of responsibility, empathy, and the power of calm, careful human intervention. In the end, the incident served as a reminder to everyone present that actions have consequences, and that respect for living beings is essential. The combination of quick thinking, authority, and compassion had prevented harm and turned a moment of tension into a valuable lesson. The horse, calm and dignified, continued to be a symbol of patience and resilience, teaching observers that trust, care, and empathy can restore peace even after moments of fear and conflict. The day had begun like any other in the bustling city square, full of laughter, music, and the steady rhythm of daily life. Yet, as the sun began to lower toward the horizon, the square held a lingering sense of the lessons learned from the afternoon's events. People moved about with renewed awareness, their steps careful and considerate, and even the children seemed to carry a quieter energy, as if influenced by what they had witnessed. The tourist, once impulsive and frustrated, now stood quietly, observing the calm scene around him with a sense of reflection he had not experienced before. The horse, now fully relaxed, stood beside its handler. Its shiny coat glistened in the fading sunlight, and its eyes held a gentle, steady calm that reflected both relief and trust. The carriage driver continued to speak softly to the animal, reinforcing the bond that had helped the horse regain its composure after the startling incident. "You've been very brave today," he murmured, running his hand along the horse's neck. The animal responded with a soft nicker, a subtle acknowledgement of the comfort and reassurance it had received. Observers nearby could see the connection between the horse and its handler, a relationship built on patience, care, and mutual respect. The tourist stood a short distance away, his posture reflective and subdued. He had been guided by the officers through the necessary procedures, answering questions about his actions and providing statements about the sequence of events. Each step of the process had been handled with calm professionalism, allowing him to understand the gravity of his behavior without fear or humiliation. The officers had been clear and patient, explaining that while no serious harm had occurred, public safety and animal welfare laws exist to prevent even minor incidents from escalating. As the tourist watched the horse, he seemed to grasp, perhaps for the first time, the importance of empathy and patience. He noticed the way the animal responded to gentle words and reassuring touches, and he realized that his earlier frustration had not only startled the horse, but had also disrupted the harmony of the square. The sight of the horse standing calmly, fully trusting its handler, seemed to leave a quiet impression on him, a lesson that would likely remain with him long after he left the city. Around them, the square had returned to its normal rhythm. Street performers resumed their acts, musicians played soft melodies, and vendors called out to attract customers. Children ran around the fountain, their laughter blending with the soft clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones. Yet beneath the surface of everyday life, a subtle awareness had been woven into the crowd's consciousness. Witnesses, tourists, and locals alike seemed more attentive to their surroundings and more considerate in their interactions with both people and animals. The incident had transformed from a moment of conflict into a quiet reminder of responsibility and care. The security guard, who had been vigilant throughout the incident, finally allowed himself a small sigh of relief. He watched as the tourist followed the officers, cooperating fully and showing signs of understanding. The guard knew that his calm and steady intervention had helped prevent further harm, and that the careful handling of the situation had made a lasting impression on everyone present. His role had been crucial, but he also understood that the true lesson extended beyond the immediate incident. It was about awareness, empathy, and respect for all living beings. Meanwhile, the horse continued to move gently, guided by the careful hands of its handler. The carriage driver checked the harnesses and reins, ensuring that everything was in perfect order. The animal's calm demeanor reflected not only its own resilience, but also the effectiveness of the human care surrounding it. Observers could see the importance of proper handling and training, and many were silently reminded that animals, while strong and capable, require patience, understanding, and respect from those who interact with them. The officers completed the remaining formalities with the tourist, explaining the potential consequences of future incidents and emphasizing the importance of learning from mistakes. The tourist listened attentively, nodding occasionally, and seemed to internalize the message. It was clear that he had gained a newfound understanding of the responsibilities involved in public behavior and animal welfare. The professional and calm approach of the authorities had allowed him to reflect honestly, without fear, and to recognize the impact of his actions. Witnesses who had remained nearby began to talk quietly among themselves, reflecting on the events of the day. "It really shows how small actions can have big consequences," one person remarked. "But it also shows that calm and thoughtful intervention can prevent a situation from getting worse." Another added, "I hope everyone who saw this remembers to treat animals kindly and think before they act. Even one moment of carelessness can cause fear or harm." These conversations highlighted the lasting impression the incident had made, transforming it into a broader lesson for all who had witnessed it. The horse, completely calm now, nickered softly as if acknowledging the attention and reassurance it had received. Its ears flicked attentively, listening to the gentle murmurs of the crowd and the soft words of its handler. The bond between the horse and the carriage driver had been strengthened by the incident, and the careful handling of the situation had reinforced the animal's trust in humans. Observers could see the subtle communication between the two, the unspoken understanding that allows humans and animals to coexist harmoniously, even in the midst of unexpected events. As the day continued, the tourist remained reflective, quietly observing the peaceful scene. He noticed the smiles of children, the gentle interactions between tourists and animals, and the careful attention of the guards and handlers. Each detail seemed to leave an impression on him, reinforcing the lessons he had learned about patience, empathy, and public responsibility. The incident, which had started with frustration and impulsiveness, was now transforming into an opportunity for growth and understanding. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving behind only a few lingering witnesses who continued to watch the horse and its handler. Conversations turned to reflection and discussion of what they had learned. Many people shared the story with friends and family, emphasizing the importance of treating animals with respect and understanding the responsibilities that come with interacting in public spaces. Children in particular seemed to absorb the lesson, their questions and observations reflecting a growing awareness of empathy and kindness. The carriage driver, satisfied that the horse was calm and the square had returned to normal, began preparing for the next ride. He checked the harnesses and reins one final time, ensuring that everything was secure and comfortable for both the horse and the passengers. The horse moved with steady confidence, demonstrating the resilience and strength that comes from careful training and patient handling. Observers watching the scene could see that the incident had not left lasting fear in the animal, thanks to the calm and considerate approach of those responsible for its care. The tourist, now walking alongside the officers, seemed introspective. He glanced at the horse one last time, perhaps silently apologizing or reflecting on the lessons learned. The experience had given him a new perspective on patience, empathy, and the impact of one's actions. He seemed to understand, at least in part, that public spaces require mindfulness and that animals, while gentle and strong, are deserving of care and respect. As the sun set behind the historic buildings lining the square, casting warm golden light across the cobblestones, the city seemed to exhale a quiet sigh of relief. Life continued, but the lessons of the day lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed the incident. People moved more thoughtfully, children played with greater awareness, and even casual tourists carried with them a subtle reminder of the importance of kindness, patience, and empathy. The officers completed their final checks, ensuring that the tourist understood the importance of respecting public spaces and the welfare of animals. They emphasized that while no serious harm had occurred, incidents like this highlight the responsibility each person has in maintaining harmony and safety. The tourist listened carefully, nodding, and seemed to internalize the guidance with sincerity. The horse, fully calm and dignified, prepared to continue its work in the square. Its gentle movements and calm demeanor were a testament to the care and patience it had received, as well as the trust it had developed with its handler. Observers could see the value of understanding and respect in human-animal interactions, and the incident became a quiet story of resilience, empathy, and responsible behavior. By the time the city lights began to glow, signaling the approach of evening, the square had returned to its familiar rhythm. Tourists and locals moved about with a sense of calm and awareness. Children played, and the gentle sound of hooves against cobblestones continued as the horses carried their carriages gracefully through the streets. The tourist, now a quiet witness to the harmony around him, walked away with a newfound understanding of patience, responsibility, and the importance of treating all living beings with care. In the end, the incident became more than just a moment of tension. It became a lasting lesson for everyone present. The horse's calm demeanor, the professionalism of the officers, and the careful intervention of the security guard transformed a frightening moment into an opportunity for growth and reflection. The story of that day would be remembered as a reminder that empathy, patience, and respect are essential, not only in interactions with animals but in every aspect of life. The city square, once again full of life, carried the quiet imprint of the afternoon's events. For the horse, it was a reminder of trust and resilience. For the tourist, it was a lesson in reflection and responsibility. And for everyone who had witnessed the scene, it was an enduring example of how calm, thoughtful actions can restore peace and teach valuable lessons about respect, empathy, and harmony.